Imagine you're sitting around a fire, late at night, somewhere in the ancient world. There are four men there, each of whom knew Jesus, or knew people who did. And someone says, "Tell me about him. Tell me who he was." The first man leans forward and starts talking fast. He's urgent, breathless almost. Every sentence feels like it's rushing to the next one. And immediately, and immediately, and immediately. He wants you to feel the momentum of it, the miracles, the movement, the sheer unstoppable force of this man Jesus moving through Galilee. He paints with broad brush strokes, bold colors. He wants you to follow. The second man is more careful, more organized. He's clearly thought about this a long time. He lays things out in a structure, almost like a teacher would. He talks about Jesus fulfilling things, ancient promises, old prophecies. He's writing for a community that knows the scriptures, and he wants them to see the through line. The third man. He's different from the first two. He has a heart for the people no one else is writing about. The poor, the women, the outsiders, the ones everyone else overlooked. His stories have a warmth to them, a tenderness. He weeps with people. He notices them. And then there's the fourth man. He's been quiet this whole time. He's older now. He's had decades to sit with everything he saw and heard. And when he finally speaks, he doesn't start with a birth. He doesn't start with a baptism. He doesn't start with history at all. He starts at the beginning of everything. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's the Gospel of John. And from that first sentence, you already know, this is not like the other three. The synoptic world. To understand what makes John so different, we have to first understand what the other three Gospels share. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the synoptic Gospels. That word synoptic comes from a Greek phrase meaning seen together, and scholars use it precisely because these three can be laid side by side and compared. They overlap. They borrow from each other. They tell many of the same stories, sometimes in nearly identical language. They share a common skeleton. Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist. He's tempted in the wilderness. He calls his disciples. He teaches in parables. The sower, the prodigal son, the mustard seed. He heals the sick. He feeds 5,000 people with almost nothing. He enters Jerusalem on a donkey. He's betrayed, arrested, crucified, and raised. That's the arc. And all three synoptic writers follow it with remarkable consistency. They also share a common geography. In the synoptics, Jesus spends most of his ministry in Galilee, the rural, working-class north of the country. He comes down to Jerusalem essentially once, at the very end, for the Passover that leads to his death. One visit, one final week, and then it's over. Now hold that in your mind, because John is about to turn it upside down. John's different map. When you open the Gospel of John and start reading, the first thing you notice, if you're paying attention, is that Jesus is in Jerusalem constantly. John's Jesus doesn't stay in Galilee and make one dramatic final journey south. He travels back and forth repeatedly. He's in Jerusalem for the Passover, then he's in Judea, then Galilee, then Jerusalem again for a festival, then Galilee, then Jerusalem again, then across the Jordan, then to Bethany, then Jerusalem for his final week. Scholars have counted at least 3, possibly 4, distinct Passover celebrations in John's Gospel. That means the ministry John describes spans at least 3 years. The synoptics, taken on their own, could be read as a ministry of only 1 year, maybe less. This isn't a small discrepancy. This is a fundamentally different picture of what Jesus' life looked like. And it raises a question that has fascinated historians and theologians for 2,000 years. Which is historically accurate? Did Jesus visit Jerusalem once or many times? Was his ministry 1 year or 3? Most historians, when they try to reconstruct a timeline, actually lean on John for the duration. The 3-year framework fits better with what we know about the rhythms of Jewish life, the Passover calendar, the way movements grow and develop. The synoptics may have collapsed the timeline for literary and theological reasons, but here's the thing. John wasn't trying to write history the way we mean it today. None of them were. They were writing testimony. They were writing meaning. And John was doing that more deliberately, more consciously, more theologically than any of the others. The missing stories. Here's something that will surprise you if you've never noticed it before. The Gospel of John does not contain the Lord's Prayer. Think about that. The prayer that billions of Christians have prayed for 2,000 years, Our Father, who art in heaven. It's not in John. Not a single word of it. John also doesn't have the Sermon on the Mount. He has no Beatitudes. No blessed are the poor in spirit. No blessed are the meek. Nothing. He has no parables. Not one. The Good Samaritan? Not in John. The prodigal son? Not in John. The lost sheep? The 10 virgins? The talents? The laborers in the vineyard? None of it. He doesn't have the Transfiguration, where Jesus' face shines like the sun on the mountaintop. He doesn't have the institution of the Eucharist at the Last Supper. No, this is my body, this is my blood. He doesn't have the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus sweats blood and begs the Father to take the cup away. These are some of the most iconic scenes in the Christian story, and John leaves them all out. Why? The most likely explanation is also the most fascinating one. John probably knew the other Gospels existed. He was probably writing for a community that already had access to them. He didn't need to repeat what had already been told. He was writing to go deeper, to add what the others hadn't said, to illuminate what the others had only hinted at. He was writing a theological companion, not a historical summary. The stories only John tells. In exchange for everything he leaves out, John gives us things no one else does. He gives us the wedding at Cana, the very first miracle, turning water into wine at a feast. It's such a human, intimate scene. A family embarrassed because the wine has run out. A mother nudging her son. And Jesus, quietly, transforming the ordinary into something extraordinary. The other 3 never mention it. He gives us Nicodemus, a Pharisee, a powerful religious leader who comes to Jesus secretly in the night. There's something so real about that detail. He wants to know, but he's afraid to be seen wanting to know. And in that nighttime conversation, Jesus says one of the most quoted lines in all of Scripture. You must be born again. He gives us the woman at the well, a Samaritan woman, which meant she was doubly an outsider, both by ethnicity and by reputation. 5 husbands. Drawing water alone in the heat of the day, when no one else would be there. And Jesus sits down with her and has the longest recorded one-on-one conversation in any of the 4 Gospels. He doesn't avoid her. He doesn't condescend to her. He tells her quietly who he is. He gives us the man born blind, a whole chapter dedicated to one healing, one man, and the long, messy aftermath of what happens when a miracle disrupts the social order. It's almost novelistic in its detail. The neighbors arguing, the Pharisees interrogating, the parents afraid to speak, and the man himself, growing bolder and bolder, refusing to back down. He gives us Lazarus, the most dramatic resurrection story in any gospel, 4 days dead, wrapped in burial cloths, called out of the tomb by name. And before it happens, John gives us 2 words that have stopped readers in their tracks for 20 centuries. Jesus wept. Not a speech, not a theological discourse, just grief. Raw, human, unashamed grief. Even knowing what was about to happen, he wept with the people who were weeping. That is John's Jesus in a single image. The I am statements. Now we get to the heart of what makes John theologically unlike anything else in the New Testament. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus rarely makes explicit claims about who he is. He teaches, he heals, he calls people to follow, but he's often indirect, speaking in parables, deflecting questions, telling people not to tell anyone what they've seen. Scholars call this the messianic secret. John's Jesus has no such secret. In John, Jesus speaks about himself in the most direct, stunning terms imaginable. And he does it through a series of declarations that would have been immediately explosive to any Jewish listener. The I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. 7 of them. And every single one begins with those 2 words, I am, in Greek, ego eimi, which is the same phrase used in the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush and says, I am who I am. John's Jesus is not being subtle. He is making an explicit, unmistakable, world-shaking claim, not just to be the Messiah, but to share in the very identity of God. At one point in John, Jesus says to the religious leaders, before Abraham was, I am, and they pick up stones to throw at him. Because they understood exactly what he was saying. He wasn't saying he had existed for a long time. He was claiming the divine name for himself. That kind of language is simply not in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. It belongs to John alone. The long farewell. There's one more section of John that stands completely apart from anything in the other Gospels, and it may be the most extraordinary passage in the entire New Testament. Chapters 13 through 17, the Last Supper Discourse. In the other Gospels, the Last Supper is relatively brief. Jesus shares the bread and the cup. There's some tension about who will betray him. They sing a hymn and leave for the garden. In John, it's an evening that stretches across 5 full chapters. Jesus washes his disciples' feet, an act so startling that Peter refuses to let him do it. He talks about going away and coming back. He talks about the Holy Spirit, whom he calls the Paraclete, the Advocate, the Comforter, who will come and be with them after he is gone. Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. I am the vine, you are the branches. And then, and this is breathtaking, he prays, out loud, for his disciples, for the people who will come after, for you, if you believe. He says, I am praying not only for these, but for all who will believe in me through their word. It is a prayer that reaches across time, across 2,000 years. No other gospel gives you this. No other gospel lets you sit in the room and listen to Jesus pray over the people who love him on the last night of his life. John wanted you to hear it. The author and his purpose. So who wrote this? Who was sitting by that fire, the oldest one, the one who waited and thought and finally spoke from the beginning of everything? The tradition says it was John, the son of Zebedee, one of the inner circle, one of the fishermen Jesus called first. But here's something beautiful. The author never names himself in the text. He refers to himself only as the disciple whom Jesus loved. That phrase appears 5 times. At the Last Supper, leaning close to Jesus. At the foot of the cross, where Jesus entrusts his mother to his care. At the empty tomb, where he outran Peter and arrived first. And, in the final chapter, sitting in a boat, the first one to recognize Jesus on the shore, the disciple whom Jesus loved. He lets that be his whole identity, not his name, not his title, just the one who was loved. And at the very end of the gospel, he tells us plainly what he was trying to do with all of it. He writes, "These things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." That's the whole mission. Not to inform, not just to record, but to produce belief, to give life. 4 Gospels, 4 voices, 4 witnesses to the same impossible, world-altering life. Matthew, the teacher, building a careful case. Mark, the storyteller, breathless and urgent. Luke, the compassionate one, finding the faces in the crowd everyone else walked past. And John, the mystic, the theologian, the old man who had spent a lifetime not just remembering what Jesus said, but asking what it meant. Who looked at everything he had seen and heard and came back with something that wasn't just a biography. It was a meditation, an invitation, a claim so large it either changes everything or it changes nothing. He started at the beginning of time. He ended with a shoreline, a fire, a fish breakfast, and a question asked 3 times to a man who had failed 3 times. Do you love me? That's John. That's why it's unlike anything else. And if you've never read it as its own thing, not as background noise to the other 3, but as its own complete, strange, luminous document, I'd encourage you to try. Start at chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and see where it takes you. If this video gave you a new perspective on John or made you think about the Gospels differently, consider liking the video. It helps more people discover this content and shows it's worth exploring further. If you're interested in deeper insights into the Bible, early Christianity, and overlooked questions, subscribe and turn on notifications for meaningful, in-depth uploads, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever read John all the way through and what stood out or puzzled you?